Hey everyone, welcome to our webinar series. My name is Darren. I'm a physical therapist at 92nd Street. I'm a physical therapist. I graduated from Temple University, and I'm happy to be at Spear right now.
Hi, my name is Jill. I am at the Spear Long Island City location. This is my second webinar, and I also graduated from Australia on the West Coast.
So today we're going to be talking about runners, and not just specifically about injuries or anything like that. We're going to be talking about strength training. Jillian's background with CrossFit and strength training and all those amazing techniques, we're going to kind of combine that with runners, especially because I treat a lot of runners. So we're going to go through why strength training is most apparent and very important for runners. So just some of the goals for today. We're going to go over just generally just a couple common running injuries and just how they occur. Again, if you want to go past other webinars, we've gone over different running injuries, how they happen, all those. We're just going to briefly talk about them, but if you want to refer back to that, please do so. We're also going to then go over some strength training principles and just a little bit of physiology. You don't need any degrees at all. You can just follow along with that. And then what you can take home today, which is going to be the best part, is the best strength training exercises that you can do even today. So after that, we're going to go through some of our, any questions that you're going to think about. So we're going to open it up, and that's going to when you can do the live Q&A, which is going to be in the future. So just some of the most common running injuries. These are going to be the shin splints. Those are the nagging, just kind of nervy feeling right by your shins, especially when you run on hard concrete. We talk about runner's knee. Those, it's just kind of an umbrella term, especially when you think about female, and we'll kind of go through the female anatomy, how their hips are a little bit wider, and that puts a little bit more knee valgus. That kind of puts more stress at the knee. So runner's knee is this very overgeneralized kind of idea. Yes, for men too, it could be just pounding on the knee, and that's going to be actually weakness from the different muscles that are above and below, which we'll go over. A little bit deeper down, the posterior tibialis, that is actually down by the ankle. It helps with the pronation, helps with your foot position, especially if you have a running form that either you're overpronating or underpronating. That is going to be due to the actual structure of the ankle. Especially also with Achilles tendonitis, that's going to be right behind. You've seen it, this really big kind of tendon right behind your heel. You've seen sometimes those actually rupture, but for runners, that can just be very irritated, especially with running uphill. In addition, hip pain, this could be labral tears, anything hip flexor strains. A lot of the musculature and also the joints that are in the hip can be overused. And lastly, hamstring strains, especially if you're more of that sprinter and you're running really, really fast, you can definitely strain your hamstring. But in general, I think overuse injuries is probably the most common injuries for runners. And that comes from maybe, you've been in the pandemic and, you want to get out of the apartment or out of the home for a little bit, and you're going to go run, and you're going to do that 4 or 5 times a week, and your body's not used to that. And then all of a sudden you're starting to creep up with these injuries. And this is where hey, what's going on? So just some ideas, especially when you're looking at runners, and we're gonna talk about this especially when we start to move around a little bit here. But when you look at the different positioning from the foot to the ankle to the knee to the hip, even the low back, each one needs to kind of work in a conjunction with each other. Meaning that especially the contact with the ground, what happens then at the ankle, what happens at the knee. We said, okay, if females have wider hips because of childbirth, their knees are going to be a little more caved in. We call that knee valgus. So what that does, that places a little more stress at the knee, but that's actually an issue more from maybe the weakness of the hips and what's happening down by the ankles. Not even that, but if you have more stiffness in your low back, and you aren't rotating your back as much, you're then using different muscles that are going to be overused. So really, it's not just the actual injury or maybe what's happening, let's say if it's a knee or a hip, but what's happening down at the foot, what's happening at even the back. You should be able to rotate, you should be able to hit the ground in the most optimal and stable way. So through mobility and stability assessments, this is where we find what are those missing links in the chain. So here's a video. The video is just kind of showing just some generic running gaits, and just take a look at it. There's some people that run with a different gait style. Again, we're not going to go through what is the perfect running form. There's no such thing as a perfect running form. It really is very dependent to you and your body. If you're old, young, it doesn't really matter. We all need to have muscles that work in conjunction with each other. So just taking a look at this video, you can see that for some people, they're very upright. Some of them hit their foot with more of a heel, with a toe. It doesn't necessarily matter. It really depends what's happening up the chain as well. Because if there are some weaknesses in specific muscles, which we'll go over, that is where more of the overuse injuries come from the muscles that are already being used. So just take a look at that for reference, and you just see the different styles of running. There's really no perfect gait or running. So especially talking about what I referenced before, some people are more pronated, meaning that their foot caves in. Some people are more neutral. Some people are more supinated, meaning their foot is more caved out. If you've ever been to a running store before, they've probably recommended orthotics or some sort of supports. While some people definitely need that because their structures collapse and they need that support, to be honest, you need more of that stability and intrinsic training, meaning that if you have the structures in your foot to maintain an arch, to maintain stability, let's work on that and not necessarily have to just support it with an orthotic or just some sort of support or even a brace. Let's work on what we have to get stronger and more stable. And very similar to what I was talking about before, even the hip position, some of them, some of us have neutral hips, some of them are a little bit more outwards, some of them are a little bit more inwards. That will dictate on what is weak, meaning are the hips weak? What happens at the knees? What stresses are placing at the knees? So as you can see in the next picture here, running form is very, 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 like generic when you talk about, hey, some people need to be upright, some people need to be more forward. It really depends on you and your body and what is most optimal for you. All right, so let's try out some of these ideas. So I'm gonna have Jillian over here. We're gonna go through an assessment. You can do this at home. And for each of these, I want you to think about what you're feeling in your body. Meaning, is one part tight? Is maybe something feels weak? Something feels a little bit different? If you have a pain with any of these, definitely stop and definitely see a licensed physical therapist if you are having an injury or if you are diagnosed with something and you want it checked out further. But we're going to go through each one of them and we're going to talk about them. Okay, so we're going to go through an assessment now. So for each of these, just take note of how you're feeling. This should just be for your reference on maybe what is tight, what is weak, and then we're going to talk about it a little bit later. So Joan here, she's going to bend over and touch her toes, nice and slow, raise back up. And for each of these, we're going to do it 3 times. And just think about, hey, what is tight? Maybe it's my backside, maybe it's my glutes, maybe it's my hamstrings, calves, and just take note of each of those. After that, you're going to have your hands on your hips. You're going to do a slight little back bend. We're going to do that 3 times. And seeing, okay, maybe I have a little bit more motion going back than I do head forward. Seeing how that feels as well, especially for runners. If you don't have a lot of extension or backwards, you're not going to be able to get your glutes or even your glutes to be kicked on your posterior chain, which we'll talk about in a little bit. For the next one, you're going to have your hands by your side. You're going to kind of go dip down to the right, dip down to the left, 3 times on each. See maybe which side feels a little bit different. This should also include, hey, when I'm running and I need to kind of be on one side or the other, does one side feel tighter, which will then compensate to the other side? So if you have some tightness on the right side, maybe it's an idea to maybe add mobility onto that right side if you are a little bit tighter. So the most important one, actually we talked about it before, but a little bit of rotation. So I want you to cross your arms, keeping your hips facing forward. I want you to rotate your top part, just your lumbar spine here. So notice that just give a really great job of keeping our hips as much as you can forward and just rotating the lumbar spine. When you are running, You should have a little bit of rotation when you're actually then driving your hip forward. That will make you more energy efficient and make sure that you are actually using kind of momentum to swing your body forward. If you don't have that rotation and you're so stiff, think about it this way, you're then just going to be using your hip flexors, all these muscles, and then overusing or overcompensating. So just an idea, hey, if I'm stiffer in either the side to side or even rotation, can I add some more motion throughout my day to kind of alleviate that? For the next one, we're going to do some squats. Again, whatever squatting means to you, I want you to do 5 squats for me. So what I'm looking for here is that how much motion is in her ankle, what's happening at the knees, are they going forward? Again, it's not bad that your knees go forward, but that for a runner can mean you're more knee or quad dominant than maybe more glutes. Looking at the back, is the back rounded at all? It looks great, but just take a note of how you're feeling. You don't need somebody to assess or kind of look at every little part of it, but just knowing generally how you squat can also mean how you actually run or move. The next one are going to be lunges. 4 lunges. They're going to be 3 times each way. And now specifically for this one, I love it because this is the most functional for runners too, because when you run, you need to actually stand on one foot. And what I'm looking for here again is that does the knee drive forward? Again, that's not a bad thing, but if you are more knee forward or quad dominant, you're going to have the knee go forward and not so much using more of the glutes. What I'm looking for too is that what's happening at the foot, is there going to be caving in, rolling out? That will put positioning of the knee and even the hip. So just an idea that when you are doing them, just to know, hey, what is happening in my body? Especially for runners, when you run, you need to stand on one leg, swing your body forward, stand on your other leg. That's basically almost a lunge. So if you're breaking down here, meaning if your foot is rolling in or out and your knee is caving in or out or going forward, what's happening when you run? It's a lot harder when you run versus doing a lunge. Okay, so for the next one, we're going to do some step ups. So what you're going to do is you're going to bend forward, you're going to step up, try to pulse, and then slowly, slowly, slowly back down. What I'm looking for here is how does the position of the body break down when we try to provide that stability. So for runners, especially when you start to go up or down, there's going to be maybe some shakiness or some knee movements or the hips or even the foot starts to really shake. That what I'm looking for is a lot of that stability and control. So if you don't have a step stool, you can do it without. So you can actually just drive your leg up and then slowly, slowly, slowly come down. Same idea, what's happening at the foot, what's happening at the knee. That's going to provide an idea of what we need to work on in stability, or if you're more stiff and tight, or mobility that way. So these are some really nice tests just to kind of get things maybe where you are. Again, if you are having pain or an issue with any of them, please see a licensed physical therapist for further assessments. But just use these for discretion. Don't actually have any diagnosis with any of these movements. Okay. So in the next photo, you can see just an idea of, okay, if you are a little bit more upright, if you are stiffer maybe in your lumbar spine, if you don't have your full hip extension, you can't use all these different muscles that need to be firing to make you the most energy efficient, so you're not overusing different muscles, causing more strain, problems, and that to make sure that you're running not just for right now, but 50, 60, 70, 80 years into the future. So just a couple last things, and we're gonna get right into the exercises. One of the most underused muscles is the posterior chain. And when I talk about that, it is the calf muscle, it's the hamstrings, it's the glutes, and it's even the low back. So for runners, because if you do not have that full extension of the hip or using even your hamstrings, you're not going to be able to generate a lot of power to get your body forward. So a lot of the stability which we focused on with that assessment comes actually from the posterior chain, meaning that if you're doing the lunges, if you're doing the step-ups, you should be able to use your glutes and your hamstrings to provide that stability. Also for your foot, what's happening at your foot? Is there that stability where you're actually using that arch, getting into the intrinsics of your foot to help provide that stability? It's all connected, it really is. So some of these exercises are going to be focusing on that posterior chain, to really work on that stability. So if you're gonna take anything at all from this webinar, stability, stability, stability for our runners. And lastly, what about the quads? Well, yes, a lot of us are very more knee dominant, meaning that when you lunge or squat, our knees go forward. Again, that's not a bad thing, but it just tends to be, hey, we're a little bit more knee or quad dominant. That's great, especially because our runners are a lot more stronger in their quads. But they also need to be strong, especially for downhill running, for our eccentric control. So when I say eccentric control, that means how are you able to take a load, or how are you able to actually be able to slowly lower down and provide that eccentric or kind of elongation of the muscle to provide that stability and that strength to actually lower yourself down. So when you're running downhill, you need to be able to be very strong, not even just in your posterior chain, which I talked about before, but also your quads for this kind of eccentric or slowly lowering down. Again, stability, which we're going to talk about right now. So I know I've been hinting all to the stability, but we're going to talk about these exercises you can get to today.
All right, so Darren just ran through a whole bunch of stuff. I know it's a lot of information to process, but as the titles of this webinar suggest, that why do we need to strength train if you are a runner? So let me just go through some key important reasons why this is so important. One, as he mentioned, there's so many key muscles that are important for that stability. When you run, you're actually like a pogo stick trying to propel forward. So a lot of time spent on one single leg trying to propel your body forward with one leg can increase a lot of muscle forces in those muscles. It can go all the way up to 6 times of your body weight. So if you really think about it, you need to have enough strength to be able to push your body forward, almost as if you're pushing 6 times your body weight forward. Right, so some of these muscles, if you are not training and you just run, like as Darren said, 4 times a week because you're trying to get rid of that COVID stationary status in your life, your body at some point is not going to be able to cope with that, and that leads to overuse injuries more so than any other thing. So all this strength training is going to help to decrease your risk of injuries. I'm not saying that it definitely won't lead to injuries, because that's not true, but it definitely can help to enhance your performance and your ability to meet the demands of your body for running. Yep. All right, so I think a lot of you probably have heard, yes, strength training is important, but you're scared to start. And one of the #1 barriers to why people don't want to do any strength training is because you're not sure where to start. You're scared they might harm their injuries even more. So we are going to run through some of the exercises today that you can try at home with proper form and with proper technique, so that you don't hurt yourself while doing this. All right? We're going to talk about some modifications you can do if you're not able to do the actual exercise, and if the actual exercise is too easy, we're gonna make it a little bit difficult for you. All right? Okay, so first thing we want to go through is the quadriceps, that's what Darren was talking about. So we're gonna actually use this step too, and we're gonna invite Darren here. All right, the first exercise is called the rear foot elevated split squat. So rear foot elevated meaning the front foot is going to be only on one leg, and the back foot is on the step, right here. In this exercise, you want to keep your chest upright, so make sure as you're going down, your body is going straight down, you're not caving forward, and the back leg is going to decrease going down, and you're keeping that body upright and coming up. All right? One thing to note as you're going down is you want to make sure that you're keeping your core really tight, and as you're coming up, you're squeezing your glutes up. And where you should feel it is the quad, right here at the front. You feel it right here burning.
Oh yeah.
If this is too difficult for you, meaning balance-wise, you're not really able to maintain that stability and you find yourself shaking a lot, you might want to do it right along the wall. So you have one hand to hold on the wall. But if, on the other hand, if this is too easy, body weight is too easy for you, if you have a light kettlebell, so this is 10 pounds, Darren is going to hold, you can hold it either on the side, you can hold it at the front. If you want to make it even more challenging for yourself and you're at the gym, you can use a barbell at the back. But ultimately, we want to make sure the upper body is straight, going up and down, chest up. All right? Awesome. Okay. Next exercise we're going to go through are your glutes. Honestly, this exercise targets the glutes, targets the hamstrings, targets the lower back. So you might feel it in different parts of your body depending on which muscle group is weaker. And this is the single leg Romanian deadlift. So let's see Darren demonstrate it. One thing we want to make sure is the back is going to be relatively straight. All right, going up. All right, and the movement is coming from the hips. The knees are a soft bend. So maybe Darren can show what you shouldn't do, meaning it's not a single leg squat. Yeah. It is, you're moving, generating the movement from your hips going straight down. So this knee is relatively straight. Good, and the back is straight. Awesome. Again, if this is too difficult, what I like to do is to hold onto a wall to do it, or use a foam roller in front and just holding it as support, external support. You can even hold a table. If it's too difficult, we're going to make it a little bit more challenging, holding a weight in front. All right, and this one we need to ensure our chest is straight, upright, so you're not caving through your upper back. Good. And as you can see, the foot is also working really hard here because he's on one leg, and that is what we aim to do. Maybe Darren show them what you shouldn't be doing. No twisting of the hips sideways to get more movement. Yeah, no rotation on the hips, just straight down and up. All right, and you should use a mirror to really look at how you're doing this, just to make sure you're not doing it the wrong way. And you'll feel it really in your glutes, some in your lower back if you're holding onto a weight, and your hamstrings. All right? Okay. Next one, the next area in the hip. This is not a very big component of running, your hip flexors, but a lot of people feel pain or strain when they do a lot of running. And that is, as Darren mentioned before, it's when you don't have enough mobility going backwards. But there's no harm trying to bulletproof those hip flexors, am I right? So Darren here is going to show what we call knee drives, where you're just driving your leg forward as if almost imitating the actual running movement, like a sprint almost. And so we want to make sure that we're trying to focus on bringing that hips up. Make sure you keep your core tight as well, going up. And just to make this a little bit harder, you can definitely add a band around your foot, just to add a little bit of that resistance going up, and you really feel it in your hip flexors. But if not, this is good enough. If you're really feeling it in this movement already, that's good, all right? Awesome. Okay, next, and we're gonna talk about the calves. So there are actually two muscle groups in the calf, one called the gastrocs, one called the soleus. We're gonna talk about the soleus today because it tends to be the forgotten muscle. When Darren was demonstrating how you run, when you land and when you're going forward, that deceleration of that muscle moving forward, that's when that muscle is often neglected. And so we are going to try to train that deceleration, so it kind of not gonna put less strain and you're not gonna get shin splints and stuff like that. So this also trains single-legged stability that we were talking about. So let's say we're standing here. You don't have to use a kettlebell. You can use a target, anything that really, just to use it as a target. Standing on one leg, you're gonna make sure, I'm gonna show you from the side. You want to make sure that your ankles are going forward slowly, all right? Can you see my ankles are really going forward slowly? And you're trying to imitate that running movement as you run on each leg, landing. You're trying to imitate that slow deceleration, okay? Going forward and come up. Right, and if this is too difficult for you, you want to hold onto a wall. I'm really just looking for this part of your shin to be moving forward and you're keeping your foot completely flat on the ground. This way, forward, and run. And to make it a little bit more difficult, you can hold onto a weight on the side. You can add multiple targets where you can really do different directions, trying to train ankle to adapt to different directions. That's good too. And you want to do this slowly going down, so not too fast. All right? Okay, we also have another movement talking about when you run, you're also bouncing off. So that's where the calves go up into what we call plantar flexion. But when we go up into plantar flexion, there's two muscle groups that are working as well. We want to focus on the forgotten muscle group, all right? So that's doing a plantar flexion with the knee bent. So Darren here is going to demonstrate it. Slight lunge with the leg forward. So this is the leg that we're focusing on. Can you see that the knee is bent here and the ankle is going to go up, heels up, good, and come down. Up and come down. And when we're doing this exercise, just make sure that it is slow and controlled, going up and down. So you're not slapping your foot up and you're not bringing it up without any control. You're consciously thinking of control. You should feel it right inside the calf. And to make this harder, the same thing, you can add on to a weight. You can hold like a sizable kettlebell at the top, or you can hold on to a wall if it's too difficult to balance in this position. Good. Okay, so let's talk about how many times we should strength train. I recommend at least twice a week on the days that you are not running. You should spread out your running days. Some running days are harder, some running days are easier, and then on the days that you're not running, just add in some of these strength training exercises. If you're talking about training strength, we want to make sure it is about 6 to 12 repetitions. So if you're on the easier side of the exercises, meaning it's modified, you're holding on to something, you're holding on to support, you're not holding on to any weight, then we want to increase the repetitions a little bit, like 3 sets of 12. But if you're holding on to a significant amount of weight, like more than 10 pounds, you're actually trying to challenge those muscles, I would cut those repetitions down to about 6 to 8, but we can stick it to 3 sets twice a week, all right? One thing that I would recommend is if you are training for a hard run the next day, just lay off the calf exercises. We don't want to fatigue that calf too much before a hard run. So just planning out your training days a little bit better and making sure you're not putting too much strain on the calves before you go for a hard run. And just listen to your body. If you feel like a lot of areas are feeling really sore, don't feel too pressured to do a hard run the next day. Your body needs sufficient rest for the muscles to recuperate and to get a little bit better, and for the lactic acid to kind of chill a little bit, and then you can move on to your actual training program. All right.
Awesome. Well,
awesome.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, I'm definitely feeling it right now. So it was a great kind of overview of what exercises would be the best for stability and kind of creating that that strength training that we think would be the most applicable for runners. So to summarize everything in kind of one little nutshell, we went through what muscles are maybe overused, underused. We went through an assessment looking at maybe what is stiff, what is tight, maybe what is a little bit weaker. And then we gave some really great exercises that could be used in strength training, which everything really comes down to the word stability, right? I mean, especially for runners. Runners, yes, you could be running marathons, ultra marathons, and both of us, we treat runners at Spear here. And I think a very common theme we've been seeing is that a lot of them don't have stability. And doing assessments such as like the lunges or the step ups, yes, you can run all those miles and do all those crazy races, but if you can't do something where you have that stability for all these different tests, that's where there's some missing links in the chain that really need to be kind of improved with strength training, which is going to help you not just for right now, but again, into that 50, 60, 70 years into the future that you should be running until then. Thank you so much, and if you have questions, please submit them. We'll be doing a live Q&A, and we can definitely answer any additional questions that you may have. Thank you, and have a great day.
the questions out there. Hello. Am I live? Yeah. Hello, everyone. So we got a few questions. So I'll take some time to read the questions and respond to them. Um, I do want to give a heads up that a lot of this advice is going to be more generic. And if you had something that was more specific, I think it would be worth to visit a professional, like a physical therapist professional, to really answer your questions specifically. But because for the sake of our time and like the people tuning in, a lot of these answers are going to be a little bit more on the generic side, all right? So the first question I got is, how many weeks of strength training should someone do before they run a marathon? So I know we just talked about how strength training is important to prevent injuries in running. Strength training definitely takes at least about 6 to 8 weeks for there to be some visible change. And so usually we want to start early. Before you start anything, make sure that you slot some days in for that strength training. But I wouldn't go all the way to say that if you did 6 to 8 weeks, you should just stop there. I just think strength training should be an ongoing thing, always challenging your body to adapt to different loads on the knee, on the hips, as you increase your running distances. But definitely give yourself at least 6 to 8 weeks before you decide to do a marathon. Running a marathon also involves many different aspects of training, like training your endurance, training your cardiovascular fitness, increasing the miles slowly. So if you just to answer this question, then the answer would be about 6 to 8 weeks to really see visible changes. All right, I think we have another question. Can you recommend stretching and strengthening exercises for the Achilles tendons? So I think I mentioned in that video, it was talking about the soleus. So the Achilles tendons actually composes of two muscle groups, the gastrocnemius and the soleus. So if you were to be training ankle, Achilles tendon strength, you would heel raises, that would be the best way to train it, either with your knee straight or with your knee bent. How you can kind of progress those exercises is you can start by doing heel raises on just a standard floor ground, and then you can progress to maybe doing single leg heel raises on the ground. You can progress to doing single leg heel raises on a step, so it gives you a bit more ankle range. And then if that's still too easy, you can even hold weights and do those heel raises. So that would be the best. In terms of stretching, I know if you Google, a lot of times they will show you some static stretches whereby you're like holding onto the wall and you're like putting one leg out. That is what we call static because you're not actually moving. But I think the best form of stretching is dynamic stretching. And if you were to do some heel raises over a step, so your ankle is fully stretched and fully coming up, that will be way more beneficial than just doing a static stretch against the wall. Yeah, and so I can't cover all of the strengthening and stretches here, but if you were to do a quick Google search, dynamic calf stretches, you would definitely have a lot of options. All right, we're just gonna wait. Frequently asked questions. While waiting for other people to kind of chime in and ask questions, one frequently asked question I get a lot is stretching more important before or after a run? And I think I would like to go back to what I said before. I think static stretching, or like at least the research has shown that static stretching doesn't really help a lot in prevention of injuries during a run. Dynamic stretching has more value to it in a sense that because you are warming up to the movement that you are going to be doing instead of just doing it stationary. So before or after a run, I would do both, but do keep in mind that this doesn't always prevent injuries, it just minimizes the risk of. So even though you're stretching before and after, it doesn't mean that you will be completely injury free. Injuries take place in many different ways and forms. So that is just one way to kind of minimize it. Right? Right. So one frequently asked question is, let's say you don't have a gym to access. How can I still do these weight training at home? And what can I use at home to kind of help me? Let's say you don't want to pay for a gym. It's very easy. You can use objects around your home. You don't need to have specific weights, but as long as you feel challenged during the exercises, that weight is definitely enough. If you don't have access to a gym, you can try to modify things around your home and set them up. So let's say you don't have a step, you can stack a bunch of books, or you can use a very stable stool, stuff like that. If you don't have weights, I always like to tell my patients you can use wine bottles that are actually, I don't know how, maybe like about 5 pounds. That's good enough to do those heel raises. You don't really need crazy amount of weights. And it's also worth, if you don't want to go to gym, investing in some resistance bands. That would definitely help with providing the same amount of stimulus and resistance to helping you get stronger. Okay, let's see. Someone asked, can you talk more about what exercises/training program to avoid shin splints? Yeah, shin splints is definitely a very common one. I think it was on the list of most common injuries that Darren was talking about earlier on. Shin splints is that tenderness that people feel in the front of your, right below your knee, like at the front of between your ankles and your knee. That shin bone is what we call. There can be many factors to it, but I would say probably the top 2 exercises would be making sure that you do not have tight ankles, so doing a lot of ankle mobility exercises. Second one would be training calf strength, so everything I talked about that someone asked about Achilles strengthening, tendon strengthening, all those calf exercises. And third one that's frequently missed out is core and hip strength. So these top 3 exercises that we covered, I think if you would need more advice on this, and if your shin splints are really bad and it's recurring, I think it would be worth to see a actual professional, just because they can tailor their assessment to your exact needs. These are just generic comments that I'm saying, okay? Someone asked, should I do core strengthening when I run? The answer is yes. A lot of just imagine your body like a building, okay, a house. If your base is not strong, the rest of the house is gonna be falling apart. So basic core strength, core, back, and hip, those are the core, the trunk of the tree, that I would definitely recommend strengthening that, because that would definitely put a lot less strain on your hips and your knees, meaning everything else that's below. Oops, sorry. Okay. Should a runner lift weights? Short answer is yes. Even though you're not a sprinter, even though you're a long distance runner, the only way to really challenge those muscles and get stronger is to be adding weights to your strength training. So a lot of these exercises that we showed just now, they were just body weighted or just a little bit of weight. But to really challenge those muscles to be able to tolerate like any types of running, long distance, short distance, sprints, jog, that would be that I would highly recommend it. What are pistol squats and do you recommend them? So it depends on what type of pistol squat you're talking about. If you're talking about a full pistol squat, that involves squatting with only one leg all the way down with your leg out. That involves a high amount of
quadricep strength, high amounts of glute strength and stability in the core, and also a lot of mobility in your ankles and your hips. So I would not recommend that you do a full pistol squat or attempt to do a full pistol squat immediately. I would recommend doing modified versions of it to train your ankle, your hips, your knees, and then slowly move down. That is a high skill movement. So I won't recommend that you just go straight into it. I would say you have to work up towards it. That would take another whole session to be talking about this. So short advice is I do recommend them because they are good exercises, but they're also a little bit dangerous if you don't know how to do them. All right. Okay. Last question. What body part do you think runners neglect the most? I would say a lot of runners focus a lot on knee and ankle strength, but as I mentioned earlier, core and hip are actually really important for having a good trunk, a good base. So if you have been neglecting those areas, I would recommend spending a little bit more time strength training in core and hips. Right? I think that's all the time we have. Should I wait for a couple more? Thanks, everyone.